Good afternoon. I'm Spencer Peterson, Vice President of Federal Affairs at the Consumer Brands Association. Thank you to everyone for joining. We're excited to have you here for this industry solutions session. This series provides insights for CPG companies presented by our premier partners at the Consumer Brands Association. I'm excited to be joined by Chris Layton, Director of Sustainability, and Brent Perry, Director of Federal Government Affairs at the Eastman Corporation. During today's session, Brent and Chris will provide an overview of the current recycling landscape and share how advanced recycling techniques can complement current recycling solutions. Given the topic's increased attention with legislators, Brent and Chris will also review policy implications for advanced recycling. Following today's presentation, we have saved time for questions and answers from the audience. If you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A panel at the bottom of the screen. Brent and Chris, we're so excited to have you join us today and share your expertise with our attendees. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Spencer. So my name is Chris Layton. I'm the Sustainability Director for Eastman Specialty Plastics business. As Spencer said, I'm joined this afternoon by Brent Perry. Brent is our Director of Federal Government Affairs, and we're both excited to be here to share with you a little about advanced recycling, what we're doing at Eastman. Next slide, please. So if you're not familiar with Eastman, we are a $9 billion specialty materials company, and last year we had the privilege of celebrating our 100th anniversary. We're headquartered in Northeast Tennessee, in Kingsport, Tennessee, but we have a team of more than 14,000 people located at plants, offices, and research centers throughout the globe. And while Eastman as a brand may not be very familiar to you all, there's a good chance you use one of our products or a product containing one of our products because we sell to customers in over 100 different countries across a wide variety of applications, including directly and or indirectly to many of you all on the phone in the consumer products goods industry. Next slide, please. Our mission is to improve the quality of life in a material way. And as we thought about that mission, as we thought about the next 100 years of our company, we realized that the world is facing, three major challenges that could potentially impact that quality of life. First, how do you go about caring for a world that's fast approaching 10 billion people? Secondly, and we'll talk more about this, we have a waste problem. And then lastly, climate is changing, and with that comes a whole host of consequences. And so as we thought about those challenges, we've chosen to put our money where our values are. We've been investing in two advanced circular recycling technologies, what you'll hear Brent and I refer to as molecular recycling. These investments are guided really by three key principles. First, we're only investing in technologies that allow us to take waste materials and create new materials from them. We're not investing in waste of fuel. Secondly, we're only investing in technologies that allow us to produce products with a lower carbon footprint than we could otherwise produce based on fossil fuels. Lastly, we view these advanced recycling technologies as very much complements to the existing mechanical recycling infrastructure. If you can mechanically recycle a material, you should. But the reality is there's a lot of materials that can't be easily mechanically recycled or aren't amenable to the mechanical recycling. That's where these advanced recycling technologies come in. And our belief is these technologies can help address and play a key part in addressing the waste plastic as well as climate challenges, and as such, be critical tools in the kit to help brands like yourself create a circular economy for plastics. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned the waste plastics problem. This slide sort of illustrates the magnitude of that problem. Every year, as an industry, we produce more than 300 million metric tons of plastic. If you subtract out what ends up in durable applications, you still end up with more than 260 million metric tons of plastic that reaches the end of its life. The unfortunate reality, as this slide shows, is that more than 80% of that ends up either landfilled, incinerated, or worse, leaked into the environment. Unfortunately, only about 16% gets collected, of which 12% is actually recycled. So if you think about the inefficiency of those numbers, it's clear we need to do a better job if we are going to tackle the waste plastics challenge. And our advanced circular recycling technologies, advanced recycling in general, are really targeting that 80+% of materials that aren't easily recycled today with the existing mechanical recycling infrastructure. Next slide, please. As a materials innovation company, we absolutely believe in choosing the right material for a particular application. And the reality is plastics are often the right material. The past year with the pandemic, I think, has taught us the value plastics can have in this application, particularly when you think of caring for people, providing protection, face guards, sneeze sheets, etc. But more generally, feeding and hydrating people in an effective and efficient way. Plastics play a critical role and will continue to play a critical role. But we've got to address the waste plastics challenge. And that's going to take a whole host of solutions, not only recycling technologies, but also reduce, reuse, refillable models as well. It's a big, complex problem. There's no single solution that will solve it. We need to be able to bring all those different solutions to bear in order to address the issue. Next slide, please. So let's talk about recycling. And for simplicity, there's really two types of recycling. There's mechanical and what we call molecular or advanced recycling. When you say mechanical, that is typically what people think about when they think recycling. So in mechanical recycling, you start with a relatively homogeneous stream. The best example is a clear water or soda bottle. That plastic is collected, chopped up, washed, and then remelted, usually with the addition of virgin plastic, to produce a new product. Very simple, very efficient process, but it does have its limitations. First, you're limited in terms of the types of waste plastics you take. It's generally got to be a pretty clear, homogeneous stream. Secondly, with each cycle that plastic goes through, you begin to degrade the polymer, you begin to accumulate color, other things that require the addition of new virgin plastic into that to be able to continue to recycle those materials. And very often, those materials get downgraded. In fact, if you go back to that 260 million metric tons of waste plastic that is generated every year, only about 3% of it actually gets turned back into the original product from which it came. So for example, a bottle going back to a bottle. A majority of it is downgraded, a bottle into maybe a fiber. The rest, as I said, is either landfilled, incinerated, or leaked into the environment. So if you can mechanically recycle, you should very efficient process. But the reality is it has some limitations. We need something else. And that's where advanced recycling, molecular recycling come in. With molecular recycling, we're able to handle a much wider variety of plastics. So think of not only a clear soda bottle, but colored PET bottles, thermoforms, films, other types of plastics, polyolefins, polystyrene, polycarbonate, ABS. Those plastics are broken back down to their basic molecular building blocks. Those building blocks more or less indistinguishable from the same building blocks produced on fossil feed. And then we feed them into our existing manufacturing processes where we can produce a whole portfolio of polymers, fibers, other chemicals through that, and to potentially do that an infinite number of times. And again, if you think of the focus on harder to recycle materials, breaking them back down, and then being able to return them into high value, high quality products and doing that in infinite time. Hopefully it becomes clear how advanced recycling can very much complement what we can do with mechanical. We absolutely need both technologies in order to address the overall waste plastics challenge. Next slide, please. So to maybe illustrate how these work a little better, let me spend a couple minutes and share with you what we're doing at Eastman. While I'll talk specifically about our technologies, they work very similar to other advanced recycling technologies around. Principles are very similar. So since the end of 2019, we have been operating at commercial scale to what we refer to as molecular recycling technologies. Carbon renewal technology, polyester renewal technology. Both are operating at scale. Both are allowing us to produce a wide variety of polyester cellulosic polymers that go into a bunch of different applications: eyewear, houseware, small appliances, packaging. And what we've done is essentially replace the traditional feedstocks with waste plastics and allow us to produce those finished products based on waste plastic. And as it turns out, with which lower greenhouse gas emissions. So next slide, please. So a little bit more detail between these two technologies. And again, not to talk specifically about ours, but more to illustrate the way advanced recycling works. So with our carbon renewal technology, it is a fairly robust in terms of the types of waste plastic that it can process. As you can see, a variety of resin identification codes. Those waste plastics fed into our process, broken down to the molecular building blocks, in this case, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen in the form of syngas. That syngas, indistinguishable from the same syngas that we produce on fossil feeds. And we can feed it into our existing manufacturing processes so that we produce a whole host of cellulosic polymers, textile fibers, acetyl chemicals that go into applications as diverse as the eyewear, cosmetics, packaging, and performance textiles. And as it said, we can do that with significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions, anywhere from 20 to 50% lower greenhouse gas emissions as a result of it, because we've eliminated that extraction, cracking of or refining of oil, cracking of ethylene, propylene. All that is eliminated because you're able to use waste plastics to start. So a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to produce that syngas versus doing it on fossil fuels. Polyester renewal technology, as the name implies, the focus here is on polyester-rich waste streams. So again, think of not only clear PET bottles. In fact, don't think of that. Think of colored PET, thermoforms, films, textiles, carpet fiber, things that today are not mechanically recycled. We break those plastics down into the basic monomeric building blocks of the polyester. Dimethyl terephthalate, ethylene glycol, those are the building blocks of polyesters, DMT, EG. Those DMT and EG molecules, indistinguishable from the same molecules produced on fossil feeds, and then we feed them into our existing processes where we can produce a whole portfolio of whole polyester finished products, including our Triton Renew product. And again, because we're using waste plastics, we're able to do that with a significantly lower greenhouse gas emissions. So you have the benefit of recycling materials that aren't recycled today, thereby diverting material that would have otherwise went to a landfill, avoiding the need to extract more fossil feed, and doing it with lower greenhouse gas emissions. And so again, technologies that can very easily complement what we can do with existing mechanical recycling. Next slide, please. This is what I refer to often as our money slide, because this illustrates what can be achieved with these technologies at scale. So as some folks may know, earlier this year, we announced a $250 million investment in a new polyester renewal technology asset. That asset has the ability to consume more than 110,000 metric tons of waste plastic. You put that in terms of consumer products, that's 11 billion water bottles, 790 million t-shirts, 2.7 billion. It gives you a sense of the scale, the potential of these technologies, leveraging that existing infrastructure allows you to begin taking a meaningful bite out of the waste plastics challenge. Again, advanced recycling alone isn't going to solve the problem, but these numbers here hopefully give you a sense of how big of an impact they could potentially have. As I said, not only do you avoid material going to landfill, avoid having to extract new fossil feeds, produce more new virgin plastic, it also has a significant impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So processing that 110,000 metric tons of waste plastic allows us to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than 45,000 metric tons, which is the equivalent of taking 115 million miles off the road. So very significant. Again, a small part of the overall problem, but potentially a big bite out of, or at least a beginning of tackling the problem on a larger scale. Next slide, please. So the last item I want to talk about before I hand it over to Brent is mass balance. We view mass balance as very much a critical enabler of these advanced recycling technologies, and quite honestly, of the circular economy in general. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, mass balance is a trusted and accepted chain of custody method for tracking sustainable materials through complex manufacturing processes. We use it when those sustainable materials are commingled, processed with non-sustainable materials in an asset. In our case, waste plastics processed in the same assets as fossil-based feeds. Mass balance is used in a variety of different industries. It's relatively new to plastics recycling. And as such, there's some education needed. There needs to be some standards established. But as I said, it's a critical enabler for two reasons. First of all, we believe mass balance provides credibility and transparency for what we're doing. When we break those waste plastics down, we are essentially creating an inventory of recycled molecules. Via mass balance, we're able to chemically trace the consumption of those recycled molecules into our finished products and on through the value chain to the ultimate end user, a brand like yourself. What it allows you as the brand to do is to be able to make a claim, number one, that has meaning, but then two, gives you comfort that whatever claim you've made has been supported by an appropriate amount of waste plastic that was fed into the start of the process so that you can make a claim with comfort. The second thing that mass balance does is it allows scalability. We want to be able to invest our money in recycling more materials rather than investing in duplicate pumps, tankage, processing lines. That doesn't make good sense from a use of capital standpoint, and it also has an environmental impact. So mass balance allows us to take advantage of the massive amounts of existing infrastructure that exists today, and in short, allows us to scale up and take a bite out of that world's waste plastic and climate challenges sooner rather than later. But as I said, mass balance to the plastics recycling relatively new, so we need additional education and we need standards under which and how mass balance is used. In our case, we use international sustainability and carbon certification to provide that transparency, that credibility, that verification that, again, ultimately any claim we make or a claim made through our value chain, there is a chain of custody that we can track back and make sure that that process began with an appropriate amount of waste plastic being recycled. With that, I'll turn it over to Brent.
Thanks, Chris. Next slide, please. I think we can go on. We can go on to the next one. I think we've covered this one. So from a policy perspective, what's needed? And Chris talked a little bit about this as it relates to mass balance, but I think it's really across the board here is credibility. Policymakers are just getting into this issue of recycling and exploring these kinds of technologies like we're talking about. And while the technologies are not necessarily new, Chris mentioned our two. Our renewal technology came on board in the 80s, and our methanolysis technology actually goes back to our Kodak days. So the technologies are not necessarily new, but the applications are new. And so there's a lot of questions about what actually constitutes advanced recycling and what doesn't. And so I think the easiest way to say it is that as Congress starts looking at recycling, starts looking at circularity, acceptance of advanced recycling technology is a huge part of that. And by that, I mean understanding what is recycling and what's not. Chris mentioned the waste to fuel, waste to energy. I think we don't make a value judgments on those technologies. They certainly have their place as it relates to the waste hierarchy. But when we say recycling, at least from an Eastman's perspective, we mean a material that can be used over and over again. And so as Congress holds hearings, as bills are drafted and introduced, those definitions become really, really important. And they, as we would argue strenuously that a definition of recycling should include both mechanical and material to materials recycling carried out the way that our technologies and others do. I know that there's questions around claims. The Federal Trade Commission is currently in the process of updating its green guides, which will be finalized next year. It's important that those green guides reflect these advanced recycling technologies as solutions to the waste plastic crisis. In terms of mass balance, Chris touched on this as well. The real benefit here is the ability to use existing assets to recycle hard to recycle plastics and materials. Not having to construct brand new facilities to do that allows us to recycle more of those materials today. As with the acceptance, FTC green guides will play an important role in this. In fact, right now, NIST is doing research on mass balance and sorting through what it should look like in this space. As with the acceptance of advanced recycling technologies, there's just not a lot of knowledge on mass balance. And the nice thing is that there are other industries like the renewables industries that have used this. So having a precedent here is helpful, but educating policymakers, staff, and other stakeholders on why mass balance is important to get these kinds of technologies off the ground is a key policy need. And then finally, harmonization. I know that Consumer Brands has called for a national standard in a lot of these places. As you all probably know, there are 9,000 jurisdictions that run recycling programs all the way they see fit. And so that lack of harmonization means collection and sorting is also completely unharmonized, and it's incredibly inefficient. So any opportunity to get jurisdictions to take advantage of best practices that are out there are important. There are a number of bills on the Hill that call for some competitive grants to those that are doing this well. And we think there needs to be at least a basic clearinghouse where communities can go and look and see which communities and jurisdictions are doing this well, and then they can put those into practice. Next slide. So the takeaways from our perspective, as Chris touched on, there's no single solution to this problem. When you look at the amount of plastic material that is not being recycled, we're going to need all the solutions to fix this. Technologies like ours complement the existing mechanical recycling system. And But to solve the problem, the massive problem that it is, we do need all solutions. And having advanced recycling accepted as a viable form of recycling is critically important. For us to do this in a short period of time, we're going to need mass balance. We're going to need to be able to have that chain of custody accounting methodology. And as we scale up, we will continue to use more and more waste plastic as our feedstock. But then again, that is only, we're only able to do that with what we can collect and sort. And finally, there is a role of the federal government here. A set of national definitions would be really helpful, and some harmonization across state and local policies would also increase the efficiency here. And I think this last point is really important because for the longest time, this has really been the purview of state and local governments. And so I think there's certainly some heartburn of certain legislators about moving this to Washington. So we're going to need some interim steps to see this harmonization before we get to that national policy on recycling. James, I think that's our last slide. We'd be happy to take some questions.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Chris. That was very interesting. Really appreciate the presentation, and hope everybody learned a lot there. Again, folks, if you have questions, please use the Q&A panel there at the bottom, and I know we have a couple already submitted, so we'll start with some of those, and please feel free to submit more. Here's a question that it has to do with greenhouse gas, your greenhouse gas statistics, and really a question around what the baseline is being used. But what are the GHG statistics comparing advanced recycling versus manufacturing virgin material or some other baseline?
Spencer, they're comparing kind of virgin material. So we can produce that recycled DMT and EG with 20 to 30% lower greenhouse gas emissions based on waste plastic than we could produce those same monomers based on fossil feeds. Syngas was 20 to 50, again, based on waste plastic versus producing it with fossil feeds.
Got it. Great, thanks. Another question here, and this probably particularly relevant to a number of our member companies on the line here. Do direct food contact films contaminate the stream from molecular or advanced recycling? Do materials have to be clean and dry prior to being introduced to molecular recycling?
On the first question, no. With each passing day, we are learning more about and qualifying different streams, learning how to process them. Halogens, right, can be a big problem. Some coatings, like silicone-based coatings, can be a problem if they're at high enough levels. But in general, direct food contact materials, a little bit of residual liquid have not been an issue for us.
Great, thank you. All right, we have some more questions here. Let's go. Knowing the early state of advanced recycling, what type of on-pack claims can CPG companies utilize to promote its usage that will be within the FTC Green Guides? And I think Brent touched on this a little bit, but
yeah, so Brent touched upon it. Those FTC Green Guides are very much evolving, but what we've seen across our customer base are claims within two big buckets simply. There are some customers making recycled content claims, and what they're doing is qualifying that claim, essentially saying, hey, this product contains X% certified recycled content as allocated by ISCC mass balance, right? That is one type of claim. That's actually the type of claim we make on our resins that we're selling through the value chain. The other types of claims I've seen from customers are what I call more general marketing claims of, hey, this product was made using these advanced recycling technologies, or hey, this product is contributing to a circular economy, or this product has allowed us to divert materials. So those are the two types of claims that we have made that I have seen from our customer base on pack and or on the supporting product pages on the website.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off of that, these technologies have really become to scale over the last year or two. So we're really at the advent of these technologies, and it's fortuitous that the FTC Green Guides are going to be written right around the same time, because there will be a lot of comment on the inclusion of these technologies and the claims that you can make, both advanced recycling and mass balance. And so you're going to have some real clarity when those are finalized in 2022.
Great, thank you guys. Let's move on to another question here. Will molecular recycling handle high barrier, multi-polymer, multi-layer structures, or are those too difficult to manage? Are polyolefins preferred?
Polyolefins, polyesters are preferred, but the technologies are really robust enough to handle multi-material constructions. As I said earlier, there are some coatings, silicone, for example, that can be problematic. Coatings that have high halogens, like flame retardants, can be problematic for us if they're above kind of the purity levels. But in general, these technologies are robust enough to handle kind of multi-plastic, mixed plastic constructions.
Great, thanks, Chris. Question probably for Brent, but maybe for Chris. As Congress considers infrastructure legislation and other legislation that might touch in this area, what types of policies, I know you mentioned harmonization earlier, but what types of other policies, maybe physical infrastructure or otherwise, can be helpful in supporting advanced recycling?
Yeah, thanks, Spencer. And I think it's important to note that companies like Eastman and others are making investment on the technology side, on the processing side. Any kind of infrastructure bill that includes funding for state and local governments to fund the infrastructure on their end, the collection and sorting equipment that's needed, would be incredibly helpful. I'm going to just give you an example right now. We are working around Kingsport, Tennessee on a regional project on a materials recovery facility around us. And we're doing that because it's close. If there was an infusion of federal matching dollars around that, we could do this in other places and increase the amount of material being collected.
Great. And then the inverse question, what should Congress not do? What would sort of be a deterrent to advanced recycling in the future?
I mean, I would encourage Congress to do some pretty deep research on what these technologies are, and as importantly, what they are not. Oftentimes, when I meet with congressional staff, there's an assumption that we are burning or incinerating something, and we are not. And so understanding that there are a lot of technologies that want to fit under the advanced recycling umbrella today, understanding which ones are material to material solutions, and factoring that into any policy that comes down around recycling, I think, is really important.
And I'll add to that. I mean, we're in a unique position in that, number one, we're operating these two technologies at scale, have been doing that for about 18 months now. But then, as Brent mentioned earlier, we have a history of having operated, these technologies when we were part of Eastman Kodak for over 30 plus years. We're a pioneer in base carbon renewal technologies. So what we've been trying to do is, share and be transparent with that insight to help people get comfortable with the technologies, help address some of the concerns, some of the uncertainty that exists in them today, because as you said, they are relatively in their infancy, but we have some unique perspective from having operated them at a large enough scale.
Another question here. How do costs of molecular advanced recycling resins compare to virgin resins?
Yeah, so right now, we're able to demand a premium for the products that we're selling based on these technologies. That's because the applications that we're going into, customers are using these in applications where they can't otherwise meet the safety, quality, performance needs via mechanical recycling. As such, it makes sense. There's value in doing that. Our ultimate goal would be to get these technologies, be able to sell products at a scale enough where you can imagine getting to parity with other mechanically recycled materials, And a lot of that will depend on, can we activate more of these waste plastic streams that today are landfilled, incinerated, or recycled? The more supply of those types of feedstocks, the better it will drive our costs. But we're able to compete today, but we also are able to realize a premium because of the value that we're creating with these technologies versus the alternatives.
And Spencer, if I can just say, I mean, I really think that is the shared interest here, is improving the recycling infrastructure across the country. So you're collecting more of these materials, you get to scale faster, and obviously that brings costs and prices down.
Yep. Similar, maybe kind of a similar question, but considering what policies that the United States is considering around advanced recycling, what are sort of the rest of the world doing? What are other countries doing to advance this technology? And do we risk sort of falling behind those countries if we don't take the appropriate steps in the United States?
No, I don't think we're falling behind. Europe has a number of projects underway, and the European Commission is wrestling with how to handle the same questions that we're talking about today. I think that there are enough companies in the US that have made investments that have kind of put their money where their mouth is. And so I think that's why we're encouraging policymakers to look very closely at these technologies. When you have investment being made, you have a solution that complements what we currently have. Not doing anything that would delay that or would limit the ability to recycle more would seem to be a mistake. And so I don't think we're falling behind. I would just advise that we need to continue to press forward. And there will be opportunity, I think, particularly for things around methanolysis and other parts of the world when we can demonstrate that we're doing it.
Another question here: does advanced recycling produce materials that meet established acceptable levels of chemical contaminants in recycled food content particles?
Yeah, as I said, when we're able to break those waste plastics down to their fundamental building blocks, those building blocks are indistinguishable from the same ones produced on fossil feeds, including levels of contaminant. And then from there, the rest of the process is the same. So we're able to produce finished products that have the same safety, same quality, same performance as those same products produced on fossil feeds. And we've demonstrated we can do that. When we use waste plastics, we go through the same management of change, qualification, commercialization process to ensure that the safety, quality, otherwise integrity of our products are the same.
And I have one more question here, and it would probably be a good one to end on if there aren't any others. So I'll just maybe give a second for another question, but I think if we don't have any more, we can, oh, here comes another one. Let's see here. Oh, no, that one has already been, there's another question about is this process safe for recycled food, for food products? So we've already talked about that. But I think the last question here, what is the best way for companies interested in these issues to follow up with Eastman?
You have our contact information, Spencer. Please have anyone interested in more information or questions to contact Chris or I. We'd be happy to chat with them.
It is the presentation that you shared. We can share that with folks on the call.
Certainly.
Yes. Yeah. And I'd encourage people to, if you're interested in learning more about us or about the technologies, please feel free, go out to our website, eastman.eco, ECO, and you'll see a bunch of information around our two specific technologies. We have a lot of our life cycle analysis data out there, some case studies where we're selling these products already. You can begin to see the claims that other customers, other brands are making on these products. Another resource if you're interested in learning a little bit more about them.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. Well, I thought that was a very, very interesting presentation. We really appreciate it. I was, kind of taking notes during, as you all were talking. To me, I think the three takeaways really that I had are that advanced recycling allows for a much broader group of packaging and plastic materials to be effectively recycled, and really complements the system. The other one I noted was there's a sort of an inextricable link to climate change, and it's important to recognize the dual benefit of reducing plastics in the environment as well as the sustainability of recycled materials, and then finally just the connection to the CPG industry and the shared interest that CPG manufacturers and manufacturers like Eastman have in common in needing to harmonize the system and then work to make investments in our nation's recycling system. So I think those to me were really three of the key things that I took away from the presentation.
Couldn't agree more.
Well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us. Just a programming note, on Monday, June 14th at 2 p.m., we'll be hosting Chris Hood, president of Kellogg North America, for a CPG Speak session. A link to register is in the chat. We'll hope you join us for that session, and thank you very much for joining today.